is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ben Kentish.
At 11:02, you're listening to Ben Kentish here on LBC. Now, if you've watched the ITV drama Alan Bates Against the Post Office, if you've read the reports, if you've heard the story, as I think most of us have now, thanks in no small part to Alan Bates and to ITV, there's themes that emerge there, aren't there? There are themes of injustice, there are themes of a complete callous disregard for people's feelings and well-being, there is the injustice of it, there is the cover-up element to it. And ultimately, at the heart of it, as we've talked about on this programme, is the sense of people in positions of power and influence feeling, with some evidence, actually, that they can trample all over, quote-unquote, the little people that work beneath them. Powerful executives, people in positions of influence, doing whatever they need to do to look after themselves, to line their own pockets, to cover their own backside at the expense of, well, who cares who? That's the theme of the post office scandal. It's also the theme of several others, actually. It's the theme of several other national outrages, national crises. None, I think, less than the building safety scandal. There are so many parallels between what happened in the post office and what has been going on in the last few years in relation to building safety in this country. It was top of the political agenda for a while. We talked about it quite a lot. And then, as often happens with these things, sadly, it just drops away. It drops away, the headlines move on to something else, the politicians get distracted by other issues, so does the media. And all the while, the victims of it still, in this case, go on suffering and suffering and suffering. I want to dedicate the whole of the next hour to talking about this scandal, the next big scandal, the next big crisis, because it's ongoing and it hasn't been addressed. And at some point, something is going to happen, or ITV are going to do another drama, whatever it will take to get this shooting right back up the political agenda again. It's getting on for 7 years since the Grenfell Tower fire that really illuminated and shone a light on this issue, this problem, in the most deadly and horrific of fashions. The fact that for decades, manufacturers and property developers had been using materials that in some cases were known to not be safe and getting away with it. And in the case of Grenfell, with deadly consequences, and who can say, unfortunately, that won't happen again, because 10,000 buildings are still thought to be affected by unsafe materials, and that means an estimated 760,000 people are living in them. If you are one of those people who has been affected by the building safety scandal, I'd love to hear from you between now and midnight on 0345 6060 973. What's your story? What's happened in your situation? Has the issue been resolved? How much has it affected you? Do you think the government has done enough to help? And do you see the similarities when you read or listen to what's going on or has been going on in the post office between what happened to those poor sub-postmasters and what's happened to you and people in a similar position? 0345 6060 973. Let's talk to Jenny Garrett, member of the Sheffield Cladding Action Group and the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. Jenny, it's great to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start, if we could, with your story. How did you come to be involved in this campaign, and how have you been affected by this?
So I bought my flat when I was 22. I was a first-time buyer. Was very excited to kind of be able to get on the property ladder. It was probably the biggest achievement of my life back then, and still is now, really. Very exciting. And I bought a flat in Sheffield. And basically, when the COVID pandemic started, at exactly the same time that kind of all kicked off, we also got a letter to say that unsafe material had been found within the cladding system. So I bought my flat in 2019. I found this out in 2020. I was really, really unlucky because all the normal surveys and checks and things were done during the conveyancing process. And basically I was just a little bit too early before the government changed the regulations post-Grenfell. So I was sort of dealing with the pandemic. I had family members in hospital and found out I was going to get this unknown number of a remediation bill. And I think it's crazy now, you know, talking to you in early 2024, thinking that was 4 years ago. And I must say, not a massive amount of progress has been made since then. There is still unsafe material on the flat that I own.
And did you get handed a bill?
So our situation was that we were basically given an estimation that it would be effectively in the magnitude of around about £50,000.
Wow. For the total work?
For the total work, based on sort of what they were estimating the total work would be, and then my sort of percentage share of that. We are, it seems crazy to say, we are one of the relatively lucky ones, because our building did eventually qualify for Building Safety Fund funding, and the remediation is now happening. So I have to count myself lucky compared to a lot of the people that are stuck in this scandal. So I'm not actually having to pay for those remediation bills, but something that gets hugely overlooked in the building safety crisis is the cost of the interim measures while we're waiting for this progress to be made. So I think one of the kind of starkest numbers that people can honestly never believe when I tell them is how I'm living my day-to-day life is when I bought my flat, the service charge was about £1,800 a year, which is quite standard for a flat where I live. I currently pay over £6,000 for the service charge. On a flat which is unsafe. I can't sell it. I can't, move on with my life. And that service charge is mainly made up from the insurance of insuring the building, given the issues that they found. So to put that in perspective, our total buildings insurance bill before this was discovered was about £25,000, and it's now £400,000.
Wow. Per year?
Per year,
Split between how many had properties?
So it's about 130 in my building.
Wow.
So I pay about 1% of the total service charge based on the square footage of my flat. So it's about £4,000 of that is insurance every year. Which if you think about the cost of living crisis and all the crazy things, my mortgage has obviously gone up at the same time because of interest rates going up, so it just really is something that, although the government understandably, and I don't want to knock the fact that there has been progress made in my situation, but the government will say, we're solving this problem, leaseholders are being protected. Well, I'm a leaseholder and I am not fully protected. I am someone that is paying £6,000 a year for the privilege of having an unsellable flat that's not safe and that I can't do anything about, even though I did everything right by getting all the conveyancing checks, getting everything signed off, and told me it was a safe property to buy. And I think, that's one of the things that resonates so much with what's in the news at the moment with the post office scandal.
We'll come on to that, Jenny. There's similarities, aren't there? I want to ask you about those in a moment, if that's okay. I just wanted to ask you before then, though. I mean, what impacts that had on you? You're having to deal with this stress. You're having to fork out financially. You have been for years. You're trapped. You can't get out because you can't sell your property. I mean, how's it affected you?
It's almost difficult to describe, honestly. I think I've been in this situation for 4 years now, so there's an element of sometimes I kind of have to remind myself how horrendous the situation is, because there's an element of sometimes you forget. I think there's a lot of, I've worked incredibly hard, just in my job and everything over the last 4 years to be able to afford to keep myself afloat. And it's soul destroying to think of all that money that I've spent on things that I shouldn't have to be paying for something that I couldn't have controlled, and what else I could have been doing with that, setting myself up for the future, putting money away for for things that are really important in the future of my life and my partner's. But it is, every single time I get a service charge bill, you don't know whether the next one's going to be more expensive. I went through a period in 2022 particularly where we were actually being told day in, day out, we might be evacuating the building at the end of the week because there's no more money to pay for the fire wardens. So not only is it financial stress, I was having to call to my boss every week being like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to work on Monday because I might not be able to be in my home and I work from home.
It's affected every element of your life, really. Absolutely,
yeah. Mental health, relationships. I mean, I'm really lucky that I've got a hugely supportive family and friends network. But it's, the other thing that I think myself and to a way bigger extent, a lot of the other people in the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign, we all effectively have second jobs doing this. You know, it's taken so much time and effort and energy for people that are already beaten down, struggling mentally, struggling financially, to have to get this case, you know, our cases heard, speaking to MPs, speaking to media and trying to get the story out there. It's absolutely exhausting.
And you touched there on the similarities, as you saw them, Jenny, between this scandal, this crisis, and the post office scandal that's, well, I won't say come to light, but has hit the headlines in an enormous way in the last couple of weeks. What sort of overlap, what sort of similarities do you see between those two issues?
I think the key thing for me is about the feeling that we have been ignored and overlooked. So, you know, I watched the ITV drama, and the biggest thing for me was the fact that these poor people had been saying something must be wrong, this can't be right, this can't be happening to me, and that's exactly what we've been saying for the last 4, 5, 6 years. One of the scenes that particularly resonated in the drama with me was the scene where Joe Hamilton is looking at the numbers sort of just doubling in front of her, crying her eyes out, thinking, how on earth am I supposed to pay these costs? And I was thinking, oh my God, I remember being in a very similar situation back in 2020 when I received the email that said, you are going to be on the hook for this bill, thinking I might have to declare bankruptcy. You know, I can't afford tens of thousands of pounds. I'm a first-time buyer. I'm 22 or 23 years old at the time. And I think it's just the massive thing is that feeling of it kind of being David and Goliath. So we are the innocent victims, but we are individual people fighting against, the post office. It's post office, Fujitsu, the government, and for us it's fighting against these, the house builders that won't take responsibility, the manufacturers of the cladding, and to a certain extent the government, who, although I do, as I say, believe that they are moving things forward, it's been such slow progress that there is an element of it just feels as if all these institutions are fighting against who's to blame. And actually, in both cases, both with the post office scandal and with the building safety crisis, it's the innocent victims that get left to shoulder the cost and the mental anguish of it all, while the people that are actually responsible argue over who's actually to blame, and it's not helpful at all.
And not just argue who's to blame, but are culpable in the first place. In one case,
absolutely,
it's the multi-billion dollar or multi-million dollar in some cases companies. Their executives are responsible, and you and so many other ordinary people who have done nothing wrong are having to foot the bill.
Absolutely, and I think the huge injustice of it all is simply the fact that, in the building safety crisis, there's now almost this kind of two-tier system where qualified leaseholders who fit a certain criteria that the government has set out are having the remediation paid for. So I am a qualified leaseholder. But then there are unqualified leaseholders, just by, fitting a different set of criteria. They are just as innocent, they did nothing wrong, but they are not getting their costs covered. So it's a situation now where no leaseholder in the country built these buildings, cut the corners, chose to buy it knowing that it was faulty. But for some reason, the government has been able to say, well, you can qualify for some money and you can't. And that just seems to add to the whole injustice of it all. How can somebody that's completely innocent be told, all right, well, you're not as innocent as that person, so you're going to still have to be, paying up to this amount of money? It's just absolutely scandalous.
So the government is certainly moved in the right direction on this compared to where it started, but you're saying there's still a lot more that they could and should be doing to help people who are stuck in this situation.
Yeah, I always think it's important to sort of give credit where credit's due. And since Michael Gove took over this department, there has been progress and things have moved forward. I remember pulling my hair out when Robert Jenrick was in charge of the the department, because we just had no progress. We were basically ignored. There was actually a point where my local MP raised a Prime Minister's question about my situation, and Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, responded by saying that I had a frankly unnecessary sense of anxiety about living in a building.
Who said that?
Boris Johnson in
Boris
Prime
Johnson?
Minister's question. Yeah, when he was Prime Minister.
My goodness. About the collective angst that this has caused?
Yes, so my MP was very kindly raising my case and sort of saying, well, what should Jenny do? And Boris Johnson's response was, there's an unnecessary sense of anxiety.
Oh, it was you specifically, Jenny? An unnecessary sense of anxiety. How did that make you feel?
Well, absolutely appalled. And the crazy part about it is there are elements of the government who are saying, oh, well, these buildings aren't actually going to go up in flames. It's not as bad as people say. But then we've got the fire service on the ground decanting people and saying this building's so unsafe that you need to be evacuated. And we're in the middle, and that happened to my building, and yet the Prime Minister at the time is then saying, don't worry about it, you're just being a bit overly anxious. So it's definitely something that, in answer to your question, things have moved forward since then, and I'm very grateful for that. But the big sort of lands, I guess, the landmark legislation that was going to make a difference was going to impact things from the 14th of February 2022. That was the big time when things finally came in. Leaseholders, or some leaseholders, were going to get protections. We're now approaching 2 years on from that point, and I am still paying £6,000 a year for something that's not my
What's
fault.
the delay down to? I mean, what's the excuse that's given for that?
Well, particularly on insurance, which is something obviously for my personal building I'm quite invested in, it's, we're asking the market and the industry to come up with solutions. Now, that's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas, isn't it? Yeah. If you ask the insurance industry to find a way to bring insurance premiums down. So there is an element of the government I do believe they're trying to tackle things, but it is such an enormous crisis that they're not moving fast enough, and there's not been enough funding put towards trying to sort this out, which again is quite parallel with even now after the headlines have hit about the post office scandal. There's things coming out about the compensation scheme that's been put in place is actually going to give very insignificant amounts to some people. It's that
same sort of tight-fisted Treasury approach to helping people who've done nothing wrong. Jenny, you said that your building did benefit from some of the money. Has that work now been done?
It's ongoing.
So years later, it still hasn't been finished. So even once the money is forthcoming, there's still a huge delay in actually getting this work done.
Yes, well, to put the timeframes in perspective, we found out in, I believe it was 2021, that we would qualify for Building Safety Fund funding, and the remediation project started in July of 23.
So 2.5 years between the money being allocated and actually anything happening.
Yeah, and in addition to that, the works have now started and they've already found more problems than they initially thought, so the programme of works has been extended by an additional 6 months.
God. Do you feel like this is still as high up the agenda as it should be? There was a time when this was very much in the news, it was being raised in Parliament frequently. Michael Gove came in, as you said, and said, right, we're going to sort this out. Do you feel like there's still that political will to resolve this, or has it just, as these issues often do, dropped away, been overtaken, been superseded by other things, other events?
I think it's definitely not in the headlines as much as it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago when the sort of big legislation was going through. I think, honestly, the main reason for that is this merry-go-round in the government. Yeah. It's very difficult for anybody to keep one, particular priority at the moment when you've got... I mean, the amount of building safety ministers that I've met and spoken to over the last 4 years is just absolutely ridiculous. Some of them have come and then come back again 6 months later. So I think it's not so much that it's gone out of the kind of public consciousness, and I don't think MPs suddenly think, oh, this problem's been solved. I think it's just, you've got Rishi Sunak worrying about the Rwanda bill rather than what people are actually dealing with on the ground.
The urgent national priority that he calls the Rwanda bill. I don't believe any government minister has ever called the cladding building safety crisis an urgent national priority.
No, and it's crazy, you know, if you think about the people involved. The Rwanda bill's talking about potentially, moving around 200 people a year, and this is millions of people that are impacted by this crisis, not just directly, but also then the impact it has on. By this time, I would have hoped I'd have sold my flat onto another first-time buyer. They can then get on the property ladder.
Yeah.
And young people that were in my position 5 years ago can't find properties to buy because there's nothing that's available because all these properties are stuck.
Jenny, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. That's Jenny Garrett, a member of the Sheffield Cladding Action Group and the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. Have you got a similar story to Jenny? Did you in the past live in one of the buildings that has been affected by this? 10,000 in the estimate. Did you have to go through what Jenny is still going through? I mean, there's so many similarities, aren't there, with the post office here? So many similarities in this not being given the attention that it really should have been, that politicians still dragging their heels, the Treasury still refusing to cough up the money that's needed, people having to fight tooth and nail just to get basic justice, just to get what's basically owed to them, given they did absolutely nothing wrong in both cases. If you've been affected in any way by the cladding scandal, I'd really love to hear your story. If it's similar to Jenny's, if it's different to Jenny's. Maybe you work in a local council and you're dealing with this. Maybe you work for a property developer or a management company, and this is something that you've experienced through your professional life rather than perhaps your personal. 0345 6060 973. And we're talking, aren't we? We're talking this show about what the urgent priorities for the government should be on a day that Rishi Sunak says it should be the Rwanda scheme. It is the Rwanda scheme. If dealing with the 10,000 unsafe buildings in this country right now and the estimated 760,000 people living in them isn't an urgent national priority, then really, I ask again, what on earth is? Is it going to take another Grenfell for us to properly take note? Is it going to take another ITV drama for people to really start to understand what those 760,000 people like Jenny are going through? If you are one of them, or you've been one of them, perhaps you did manage to sell your property. Perhaps you're still in a position where you can't because of the unsafe building you live in. Pick up the phone, 0345 6060 973. And more broadly, is that an urgent national priority? Is that more of an urgent priority than the Rwanda policy? Should it be? And what do you think are the urgent national priorities? That's Rishi Sunak's phrase, facing this country. 11:27 time. Let's go straight to Mark in Abergavenny on the building safety scandal. If you've been affected by it, if it's been your story, would love to hear it. 0345 6060 973. Mark, you have been, I understand. Hi.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much for having me on the call. I've been involved now. Well, it's come like your previous caller to dominate my life for about the last 4 or 5 years. I bought a property as part of pension plan, as I've been self-employed most of my career, back in 2007. And then about 5 years ago, I think it was in 2019, I became aware that our development had serious fire defects. And while the rest is history, it's come to dominate my life in almost every aspect. It's absolutely dreadful. And we have a particular problem in Wales where housing is devolved. So the Welsh government has adopted a slightly different approach to England that hasn't helped us. So, it's been an absolute nightmare and continues to be so.
In what way, Mark? When you say it's come to dominate your life, what is it that's proving to be so damaging?
Well, I'm a leaseholder. So, as I said, I bought the property in 2007, but I'm also an elected board member of the Right to Manage company. Right. And I've become involved in all the what's generically known as the Cladmin administration that's involved when you have to deal with local authorities, fire service, rescue, enforcement notices, in our case the Welsh Government, the local Cardiff Council, and of course the developers themselves. And in our particular instance, we're in heavy litigation with the developer, which has proved very, very complex. And, we're battling on a whole series of fronts and across a really complex series of areas. And none of us asked to be involved in this. And it just consumes. You wake up in the morning thinking about it, and you go to bed at night thinking about it. It's just an absolute endless nightmare. And as your previous caller said, the parallels between the post office scandal and our own situation is remarkable. None of us, of course, have gone to jail yet, but in other ways battling big.
But also nor of the people responsible in this case as well.
Well, exactly. I mean, that goes without saying. As your previous caller said, we're people a bit like we did everything right. We had surveys, we consulted lawyers, and then we wake up and then we find that we've bought these horrendously defective properties, and people's lives have been put on hold.
Yeah.
And subjected to enormous costs.
What is it that's wrong with your building?
Well, it's a matter of public record that we have missing fire breaks, we have the proverbial wooden cladding, but we also have other build defects that have caused a lot of problems. But as a result of the fire defects, we had fire enforcement notices served upon us as a right to management company. So, we have a duty to get those fire defects solved, but the costs, as other people will testify, run into the millions. So we're waiting at the moment for developers to pull their finger and get on with it. And as I say, in other respects, we're in litigation with some of the parties involved.
So 2019, you get a letter presumably saying, just to inform you that your building is dangerous and unsafe. What happens then? Just talk me through the process, if you would.
Well, in our particular case, it was the actual builder who advised us that there may be missing fire breaks in the wall, and then on the back of Grenfell, which I think same situation took place across both England and Wales, I think fire and rescue services became involved and started investigating the buildings. And in our particular instance, that resulted in the fire authorities serving a series of fire enforcement notices upon us, which are legally enforceable instruments
on you as the leaseholders.
Well, as the management company, as the responsible person.
So the developer's the one that made the mistakes, knowingly or otherwise, installed dangerous, not just installed dangerous products in your building, but also didn't put the proper fire safety measures in place, and you are the ones that have to foot the bill.
Correct, which is the exact replica of what you see across England and Wales. It's absolutely nothing to do with, we did surveys, etc., etc. We took advice, etc. In my case, I thought I was buying into a high-quality, prestigious.
Yep.
It was a new build development. The story is replicated across England and Wales.
It's the same scandal, different developers, different leaseholders. Same story, same result. And the bill is, you're saying, Mark, the bill's massive. Have you had to pay up already, or is that the litigation?
No, that's in litigation, and the Welsh Government the Welsh Government have adopted a slightly different approach to Michael Gove, and I'd echo, your previous caller. Until Michael Gove appeared, I think we were going nowhere. And, Michael Gove still has an awful lot to do, as was described, with non-qualifying leaseholders. But he certainly changed the narrative when he started talking very tough about the developers and described them as a cartel, and that, if they didn't step up, he was going to put them out of business. Yes. And he effectively called their bluff, and I think he brought them to the table. I think the problem we have at the moment, which I know because I'm in touch with a lot of developments in England, is that whilst some have committed to remediate, it's taken far, far too long.
Yeah.
It's a very pedestrian pace. And again, I think what galls a lot of victims is at the same time, these are the same developers who are building at pace up and down the country.
They've got the money.
Properties.
They're just choosing not to spend it on making these buildings like yours safe.
Well, it's under they're spending the money, but they're working incredibly hard to build new properties.
Yeah.
But they're not given the same effort and focus to remediate
because there's no
properties that they've already sold.
Because there's no profit in it.
Yeah, and, I understand if you look at how much profit they've been making over the last decade, they've been making about a 30% return on capital, which is a very high return when a lot of people would say 20% would be more than adequate. But it is galling where we live in South Wales that we're waiting. We've been waiting, for 6 years now almost to get these apartments fixed.
So no work's been done on that building to make it safe, or has some of it been done?
Well, in our particular case, work was done, which the developer paid for to do what's called internal compartmentation, which was a serious defect internally. But that work pales into insignificance with the external facade of the building, where the big cost is, where we have missing fire breaks and wooden cladding, which has to come off, etc.
So that still hasn't happened?
That still hasn't happened.
And it's 5 years or so now since it was detected?
Exactly. But at the same time, and there's a whole series of developments across Cardiff Bay, it's a kind of Docklands area. At the same time, on the other side of Cardiff, you have all the big developers who are building effectively a new garden city.
It's outrageous. Does it scare you, Mark? Do you fear for your safety as well as everything else in this?
I know leaseholders who do. I mean, on one hand, you don't want to create fear. We put a lot of things in place. Some new fire alarms have been fitted, etc. But I mean, the fire enforcement notices haven't been removed. So, I mean, technically, the building is unsafe. God forbid anything should happen. And you have the same situation with people stuck. Some people, they can't sell, they can't move on.
Absolutely. There's over 750,000 people are in that situation, like Mark. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your experience, sharing your story, and again, the impact that it's had, dominating your life, as you describe it, and unsurprisingly so. If you've been affected by the cladding scandal, like Mark, I would love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973. And more widely, when Grenfell went up in flames and those people died, everyone said we need to learn the lessons. This can't happen again. It feels to me, I don't know about you, that we haven't learnt the lessons and that there is a high chance, a high probability that this will happen again. Mark's just been describing it. All these buildings still unsafe. It's a matter of time, isn't it, I fear, before we see this happen again. And only then, I suspect, only then, same with the post office, will the pressure suddenly arise again and suddenly politicians will start to pull their finger out and do more than they're doing now. Is it really going to take that to put this right? Have we failed to learn the lessons of Grenfell? Julie's calling from Runcorn to carry on our conversation about building safety, how it's affected you. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Ben.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for covering this topic this evening. Something we really need to highlight and keep in the media.
Absolutely.
Really. Yeah. So my personal situation, I'm 61 now. I bought a property to rent out for, my old age and thinking it was good investment. So 5 years ago, we found out we had HPL cladding on the building. And since then, it's just been a nightmare. We've paid, in just over 4 years, we've paid out 1.6 million just in insurance premiums on the building. It's very similar to Jenny's case, actually. Yeah.
1.6 mil. Between how many of you, Julie?
288 apartments.
Right. So what's that cost you personally?
Well, if you think to give it some context, before all these issues, my service charge every quarter was £254. It then increased to over £700 a quarter.
Wow.
So we're
it's almost
paying on
treble.
average. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're paying a similar amount of cost, £6,000 to £7,000 per year, just in service charge.
Wow. On top of the mortgage or whatever it is that you have to pay, if you do have to pay it. That is staggering.
Yeah. And, you know, when I campaign alongside Jenny, actually, with EOPS, and, we've consistently, from the very beginning, asked the government to fund first and then recoup the money from the developers who they know are responsible for this mess. So the government do have some responsibility. And also they tested some of these products and kept it quiet. They knew how bad they were. I won't use other words because obviously I don't want to be defamatory.
Deadly is a word that you could use. Deadly is they knew there's evidence, isn't there, Julie, that some people
absolutely
knew that these were dangerous and used them anyway.
Yes, absolutely, because the previous caller, I think, was saying that the government aren't responsible for this. They're partially responsible. There are many stakeholders who are responsible. The least of those are leaseholders like myself.
Absolutely.
We bought in good faith.
Yeah.
And, just been faced with these extortionate costs.
Do you see similarities between this and the post office? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking once again, it's the people who are innocent that are being, if not blamed, then asked to fix it and put the bill, and the people who are responsible who seemingly once again get away scot-free.
Oh, absolutely. If my developer has now agreed to remediate the building, if they hadn't done so, my personal fee for that, I believe, was around £73,000.
What? On top of the £6,000 a year you're spending on insurance?
Yeah.
And you can't sell it. You know, it's not like you can say, I can't do this, I'm getting out, presumably. It's unsellable. Oh, Julie.
Correct. We can't sell them. Yeah. I mean, you know, I only paid about $75 for the apartment, you know, in the northwest of England. They're pretty reasonable. And, but yeah.
You sound very level-headed about it.
Oh, no, I'm not.
You sound it. I wouldn't be in your position.
No, not at all. I've been campaigning now for 5 years. And as Jenny said, the toll on your mental health, your finances, it's absolutely incredible. And we're just a couple of 3 individual people. This is happening to hundreds of thousands of people throughout the country.
Do you feel there's an end in sight? Do you feel there's a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, you know, Michael Gove has all the will in the world, and he's moved things forward so well compared to other ministers. But no, right now, no. We're still paying these huge insurance costs, and there's no end in sight to those. The insurers have already told us that we won't go back to paying the premiums we did before all this.
Well, even once the work's been done?
Yeah, because apparently we were being undercharged.
Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, and now one of their big excuses, they use the problems with water ingress in these buildings. Well, for my development, the excess for any water damage is £5,000. So no leaseholder can afford to pay that upfront cost and then make a claim for any water damage. So the policies they're throwing out anyway are not fit for purpose.
And it's not just the developers and the manufacturers that are in on this, it's the insurance companies too, who are making a fortune out of it.
Absolutely, but they say not. They deny that.
Oh, Julie, I feel for you my heart goes out to you. Living with that hanging over you every day for how long? How long has this been going on since you found out it was a problem?
5 years.
5 years, and you still don't think there's an end in sight. You're right. The government's not responsible, but they're not responsible for the problem, but they are responsible for the solution. And clearly, the solution that's there is insufficient.
Correct.
Yeah. Lovely to speak to you, Jill. Absolutely wish you all the best. I really do. It's devastating on an individual level. It's disgraceful on a national level that people like Julie, people like Jenny, people like Ricky are having to go through this 5 years on almost 7 years after Grenfell and this issue was first brought to light by that disaster. How long is this going to go on? How many innocent, completely innocent people are going to have to foot the bill for the corporate greed and the malpractice of big property developers, big building manufacturers, and in some cases, insurance companies piggybacking off the back of it too? How long's that going to go on? And is it really going to take? I fear it is. I say this with real trepidation. I fear it's going to take another Grenfell before people start saying, OK, you know, all those buildings that we knew were unsafe and said needed to be fixed, maybe we should actually get on and do it now. And maybe the people living in them should have that weight lifted on their shoulders after 7 years in some cases. It's not the next scandal, it's an ongoing scandal. It's been a scandal that's been known about for 7 years. And yet it's still rumbling on below the radar. Will it take another Grenfell? Will it take an ITV documentary to put it right?